Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the eDiscovery channel. This is Tom O'Connor and I'm going to flip to something real quick here from, this is what we're looking at in New Orleans right now. This is the latest track version from the National Hurricane Center of what Hurricane Raphael is doing out in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. And
Yep.
if you can make any sense out of that, you're a better meteorologist than I am.
And
We're
now,
just
thank you for
Go
the
ahead.
weather. Now to sports.
Yeah. Uh, as you can see, I'm joined once again by my old friend Rachi Messing, who I'm guessing from our extra special guest Stefanie Bier sitting next to him is not in Tel Aviv at the moment.
I am not in Tel Aviv at the moment. I am U.S. right now, U.S. based. So
Cool.
good to
Good
be
to
here.
good to see you back. You came back. Why is it every time the Ravens are playing a big game at home, Rachi?
Hmm.
Speaking of
I, I,
sports,
I
Rachi tends to make an
randomly,
appearance.
I randomly end up in Baltimore. It's so weird.
It's just a coincidence, right? Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
So,
Well, we're very happy to have with us today, who's going to bring some elucidation to the entire issue of grabbing attachments slash hyperlinks in the Microsoft environment. Stefanie Bier, and Stefanie, correct me if I'm wrong. Your title is Principal PM Manager, Data Compliance and Privacy Products. Is that correct?
That's the LinkedIn title for sure. That is.
Well, that's where I get all my
As much
information.
into there as possible.
So be so kind, if you will, as to tell us what that means or what it is you really do.
So I sit in our Microsoft security engineering team. I am a principal PM manager, which translates to I lead our data compliance product solution. So that includes our eDiscovery solution, our data lifecycle management, our information governance solution, as well as our privacy solution and a few of the other. We have like a communication compliance, kind of like a supervision tool. We have a nice portfolio of data compliance solutions for Microsoft 365 under the Purview stack. So I lead our customer experience engineering team for that.
Okay.
Our product team engages very deeply with customers and partners to understand their requirements, and we translate that back to product specs, and then we develop them. So I'm customer facing, product lead, been in the industry for, gosh, 13, 14 years or so. I have to be very specific. Actually met this gentleman through Equivio. So we came to Microsoft together 10 years ago.
Wait a minute. What gentleman? You're sitting next to Rachi. What gentleman?
It's this dude right here. Yeah.
Yeah, that guy.
we've known each other for a little while.
And did you overlap when Rachi was at Microsoft?
So Stefanie was actually brought in at Equivio as
Okay.
one of our premier support engineers,
Okay.
and has risen through the ranks since. So joined Microsoft during the acquisition and has been there still. I left now 3 years ago. Actually, 3 years ago this past month, I left Microsoft, and she is still there and
Still in
yeah,
e-discovery.
still in
Still trying to
e-discovery.
fix all the stuff that you screwed up. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, pretty much.
But that raises an interesting point, and one myth I want to put to bed right away. We've talked about it in several other places, but the concept that somehow, as you refer to it, Microsoft 365, it's no longer Office 365. Rachi, you just referred to it as a productivity suite now, but that the efforts to deal with grabbing different data, including attachments and dealing with all that's not something that just popped up in the last 9 to 12 months. Rachi, I remember you and I having discussions about that years ago.
Yeah.
That's something that Microsoft's been working on for quite some time. So maybe Stefanie, you could give us some elucidation there on exactly what the status of all of that is and how long it's been going.
Yeah, let's actually do a little history lesson
Yeah.
on the Microsoft eDiscovery stack for the last
That was
10
that
years.
far you went. Oh,
I mean, just kind
Whoa.
of
10 years. All right.
no, but just a quick
I was
overview.
born a poor
Okay,
young
so
white boy.
the goal here is for all of our listeners is really to truly dig in and understand there's a lot of buzz, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of, whether it's from the vendor side, from the bench, from the attorney side, a lot of discussions and a lot of statements being made around what is possible and what is not within the cloud environment. Everyone kind of bunches together the cloud environment, not differentiating between the different productivity suites, meaning
Yes.
Google versus the Microsoft environment.
Yes.
And we want to just clearly define and make this the as of today, November 8th, 2024, this is where things stand. Here's a little history of where things have been and how we got here, but what is possible and what is not throughout the e-discovery process, both from a preservation and a collection perspective around, and again, this is some of the cause of confusion, hyperlinked cloud attachments, modern attachments, whatever. I know, but I'm saying history, whatever you want to call them, of data that is linked but not attached as a traditional attachment to a email, to a Teams message, to whatever it might be, and how today, from a Microsoft perspective, how is that dealt with? What is possible? What can be done? So from a history perspective, e-discovery has been there for a while.
Yeah, e-discovery's been there for a while. I think 2015, January 2015, with the purchase of Equivio, we made some big moves in just the analytics space took Equivio relevance and put it into what we now have e-discovery premium. So we do have an analytics module within the solution. At this point, with the changes and an uptick in AI adoption within organizations, machine learning is just like predictive coding is a thing of the past. So what's next for Microsoft? That's a story we can talk about in another session. But
yeah, don't get me going on that.
Cloud attachments, I mean, it's rooted in productivity. Microsoft as a whole, we're a productivity organization. We want to enable every individual and every organization on the planet to achieve more. That is our mission statement. That is Satya's mission statement, and we stand by that. I say I chug the Kool-Aid, but I believe in that. I really want organizations to be as productive as possible.
Yeah.
So we have a suite. We have Exchange for your email. You may call it Outlook, but it's hosted in what we call Exchange, and you have SharePoint as your document repository or your content or file repository solution. And you have Teams for users to collaborate internally and externally. So there's lots of collaboration that can occur within organizations, both internally and externally. And we want to enable that. We want to enable folks and organizations to keep their data protected in place. From a discovery standpoint, you don't want to export out everything. You don't want to have the redundancies, but it also creates, from our perspective, a security risk. So we want to keep as much data in place and, again, enable folks to be as productive as possible.
And Jim, let me just interrupt there. Okay. Where does Copilot fit in there, if it does at all?
Copilot's part of it. I mean, Copilot is our brand for our generative AI solution, or solutions. We have
applied to each of the individual tools.
Yeah,
right.
And I know how we engage with Copilot. There's M360, Microsoft 365 Copilot, and that's kind of your productivity Copilot. You see that embedded within like Word,
right,
PowerPoint.
Like, what are those other apps called?
Yeah.
We also have like Bing Copilot. We have Security Copilot, which is one of how Purview interacts with a Copilot. So I think there are over 150 Copilots, but don't quote me on that one.
So is it accurate to say, or am I missing the boat here, which would not, of course, be the first time? Is it accurate to say that Copilot would be the UI into these different applications? Or is it just an AI interface for those applications?
It's an interface that enables you to interact with your data in a different way, to be able to either reason through lots of data points within a certain subset of data, so you can have it within your organization, or even further refined down to a specific SharePoint repository. But again, it depends on which Copilot you're talking about.
Right.
The productivity Copilot, within the Microsoft environment, the responses to the Copilot will only give me back data in which I have access to. But again,
Gotcha.
A little different
Yep,
topic.
yep, different topic for another day, though.
We have,
So-
Yeah.
We can
But
go
it's
to another
yeah.
one of these.
it's one I get
Um,
asked about a
yeah.
lot because it's one that there's a lot of different
Discussion.
buzz about than what
Yep.
we're
Oh, yeah.
talking about. But
Yep.
people are always,
It's
but I read about Copilot. What does that mean?
Right. So-
Copilot and cloud attachments. That's about
Right.
90% of my day, discussing those two things.
Okay.
So,
So I'm sorry
so
I
within-
interrupted you.
No, all good. So within the Microsoft e-discovery environment, so first of all, you mentioned Purview,
Purview.
right?
Yep.
So what is Purview? Let's start just from we talk about Microsoft e-discovery, but a lot of people refer to it, and
I mean,
rightfully so.
Purview is it's a brand for sure.
Right.
When we started at Microsoft back in 2017, I think it was called the Security and Compliance Center, which was our
Right.
tools set for both security and compliance. It had split off into a security center and a compliance center, but the tools still remain the same as our compliance solutions. And I hate using the term compliance, but that's how we
It is.
titled
Yep.
them internally. As they grew up off of our workload compliance solutions, Exchange had their own set of things like MRM and journaling, and SharePoint had their own set of compliance tools. We migrated into a unified set of compliance solutions. And then most recently, I believe a little over 2
Right.
years ago, we rebranded to what we call Purview. And that was we brought in our Purview data governance solution, which is our Microsoft data governance platform, as an indication that we are extending beyond Microsoft 365. And that is publicly available information. Today, starting with being able to extend your data protection. So we have sensitivity labels, you can extend them now beyond Microsoft 365 data. That's our first step into that area. Yet another podcast.
But again, right.
But
there's
today,
a lot of topics.
M365
And that's actually, it's a great point because there's so much within.
And that's the real
Microsoft
problem.
environment.
That's why we
Right.
wanted to have this discussion, is because
Right.
you start talking about one thing and then you get kind of steered
Yeah.
off course into something that's important, but isn't really on point with
Right.
the whole Purview attachment
Right.
discussion.
Yeah.
And I was just gonna say, again, it's also important to note that like you said, Exchange had its own compliance tools, but like e-discovery within Exchange has been there since Exchange 2005. I mean, yeah, I'm saying like there's always been the ability to search and pull data out
Put it on
and
hold.
right,
Yeah.
put on hold. There's been e-discovery related tools within the Microsoft environment for years. With the acquisition in 2015 of Equivio, that was kind of Microsoft's statement of, we're going to actually really push on this and advance where we are from just a straightforward, hey, I can pull some data out, to here's what I can actually start utilizing tools within the system.
Yeah.
And then
And sorry to interrupt, but
yeah,
was that customer driven? Was that just because I mentioned Rachi and I used to have these discussions about, hey, this could be a problem. Like, how do we get this stuff? And, how are we going to go and find it? And I mean, was there customer input here that was saying we need to do this, or was it more a recognition inside the moat that
I think
we better take
it's
the initiative here?
It's definitely both. I think we have our pulse on the customer feedback, and there's always an indication that we need to continue to drive investments in the e-discovery space. And whether that was, 10, 11 years ago versus today, they're definitely rooted in customer feedback, but then we're also rooted in innovation and where do we see the direction of the industry. And this, for me, this is security all up. It's not just e-discovery or productivity. Where do we see the investments and how do they coincide with the direction of for me, it's like for productivity, how users engage with their data. Now it's co-pilots, now it's generative AI solutions. We always have to keep a pulse on how users are interacting with their data and ensure that we are meeting their security and compliance requirements. And how do we innovate on top of that? So long answer, it's going to be rooted in both.
Yeah.
And you see that with our acquisitions, and acquisitions are one thing, but how we invest in our products as well in the directions that they're going.
It's really interesting because I hear that the customer side, of course, a lot. An interesting anecdote was several years ago, Bill Gates was here in town for the Tulane Book Festival. And I don't know if he'd had a book out or if he just was speaking, and he showed up with his book bag with real books in it, and, was talking, and, he has his summer reading list every year. Here's the 15 books you should read this summer or whatever. But I mean, he got like 10 minutes into his presentation and he's taking questions from people, and somebody asked him about AI. It's like,
Right.
whoa, you know.
Right.
I mean, it's just like, yeah, there's that constant pressure, and he was pretty, as I'm sure you've had more interplay with him than I have, but I've met him a couple of times. Gail actually sat next to him at a luncheon at the California Supreme Court years ago.
That must have been entertaining.
Yes.
So,
I wish we had a recording of those two interacting with each other. I was actually riding my motorcycle one day in Bellevue going to an AA meeting, early AA meeting, went past a Starbucks on the right, and I looked over and Gates is sitting there with Bono, right? Drinking coffee at like 8 o'clock in the morning.
nice.
And I don't know if they had been up all night playing poker or they, and I kind of, there was a stoplight right there, and I looked over and Bono saw me. He kind of smiles, and they both wave, and he's much more personable, I think, than he's often given credit to.
Right.
So when he got asked the AI question, he went off on about a 15-minute discussion about it. It was really interesting. So
right. I feel like I need to give my CEO anecdote that's somewhat related here, and I'm going to tie it in.
I know where you're going.
Yeah.
It's January 21st, 2015.
Yep.
So it was the day of the acquisition, and I was 7 months pregnant with my second child. So I did not go to Israel for the acquisition party. Instead, I went with my husband to San Francisco, specifically Cupertino. He had a training session there. We were on East Coast time, lived on the East Coast.
See, I knew he really ran Apple.
So I went,
I knew it.
We went to Starbucks at 5:30 in the morning. And again, this is on the acquisition day. So I'm like, all right, I woke up this morning. I work for Microsoft. Sitting in Starbucks at 5:30 in the morning, and in walks Tim Cook. So I'm like, all right, fangirl moment. I have to go over. And I used to work at Apple, yeah.
Right?
So I was like,
okay.
How do I introduce myself to him? But I don't even remember what I said.
And I'm sitting in the middle of our first meetings at Microsoft, and I'm getting pictures from Stefanie of her with
Tim Cook, pregnant.
Her and Tim Cook having a latte.
Yeah, exactly.
There we go.
Yep.
I'll send the pictures over for you, Tom.
So back on top.
Okay.
So and I'm going to ask you. So we have this concept now of cloud attachments. It used to be called modern attachments when it was first introduced. The idea is that instead of physically attaching a document or whatever type of data to a email or
Teams message,
any communication, right? I can instead point to data sitting in the SharePoint / OneDrive, which is built on top of the SharePoint infrastructure, or other areas that I can say, here's the data. I'm not going to physically move it. And part of this, the idea was to reduce the overhead in Exchange. So that way, email, right? That was one of the big ideas, was so that I don't have these physical attachments having to go through the Exchange environment constantly. So reduce the overhead on the Exchange, reduce your storage. But a lot of it also was because, again, productivity suite, you were trying to make sure that people can interact with, like if I'm in a Word document, right? I'm no longer just saying, here's a Word document, send me back your version. Right. It was at the same time.
Maybe okay for one-on-one collaboration.
Right. But in a team, I want to be able to say, here's the document. Now let's work on this document together.
I mean, that's the point, right? That's the point of teams, right? Is to let people do that.
Continue to iterate, and we can iterate together live. I can be working on a document with limitations, but my team specifically have 40 people. We can be iterating on we call it our infamous 6-pagers, our internal engineering documents. It's a concept that we use constantly, and we're iterating sometimes hundreds of folks on the same document. It's a live document.
And true or not true, you can give outsiders access to that by allowing them to join the team, right?
Productivity is key, but security is also key. So when you're managing access around this this content, you can provide explicit access internally and or externally to this content, but you can also expire access on top of it. And because it sits within, Microsoft 365 is a platform. Purview sits on top of that platform, I guess for how we're going to explain this. You can apply sensitivity labels, so your data protection around it and your encryption around this content, and revoke access. So whereas before I used to send an email to Rachi with an attachment to it, he would have perpetual access to that document. It was
because now it's in my
it's just
Exchange
an
environment,
mailbox.
and it's sitting in my environment, which means that as soon as we start talking about from a e-discovery perspective,
Yeah.
right, all of a sudden that's out. If you're the custodian and you sent it to me, well, that document is living by me.
Mhm.
You no longer have control. Your counsel and your security and your compliance team no longer
Yep.
have control over that
I
document.
can no longer revoke access to it.
Yep.
Yeah.
He can go do whatever he wants with it
So,
at that
So
point.
when you initiate a litigation hold, what happens?
Well, so let's not get there quite yet, because that's the reasoning. That's part of the reasoning why this concept, again, reduce the overhead on Exchange, right? It reduced the storage, not sending these attachments back and forth constantly,
Mhm.
but also to be able to provide that restrictive access to these documents to make sure that they are staying within your environment.
Yep.
And if need be, you can stop me from accessing it.
Yep.
So,
And also, again,
Yeah.
enable productivity. So
exactly.
secure access and control around it, enable productivity, and then lower our overhead in Exchange.
And you, as the originator of that, Stephanie, are the one who does that? Who controls that access? Is there a team leader, if you'll pardon the phrase?
Well, in the example that you were giving, right, you sent me the document.
Yeah.
Right.
So I, as the user would manage that, I define the permission model on that. And that's a setting within your organization, whether you allow for that or not.
Okay.
And that's under what we call our Microsoft Information Protection Suite. It all falls under Purview. Purview is our overall.
So it's like a rights issue
plan.
Exactly.
to use the novels.
Yeah.
And maybe I
Parallel.
have view access, maybe I have actual edit access, or maybe I've got
Yeah.
timed access where after 30 days, I will no longer
We'll
have
do that,
access
yeah.
to this document. So,
Okay.
so all of that was introduced in 2018, I believe, right? Something
Yeah.
like that.
Actually, yeah, the acquisition of Secure Island came in the same year of our acquisition.
Right.
And Secure Island was the foundation for Microsoft Information Protection.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I think we're really outlining the benefits of the way of modern collaboration. And it's not specific to the Microsoft environment, but for this conversation, we're talking about the Microsoft environment. I think we can all agree that live collaboration is extremely valuable to the end users as information workers, as well as to your security department and your legal department. We can all agree that, well, I guess the legal department is what we're here to discuss, but you can definitely gain buy-in from your security group and your business about the value of using these modern collaboration features.
And Rachi, because you were with the legal department, were you guys sort of the guinea pig for this? Were you the beta testers, if you will?
We absolutely did a lot of the testing at that time, and and also client, we are, and the Microsoft legal department continues to be client number one, or client, 0, in terms of giving that feedback and giving even a lot of the requirements around, okay, how should this potentially work?
Right.
Whether it was listened to is a different story in terms of how quickly they get prioritized, but at least giving that feedback of how this should be designed and how it should work. But now that okay, Microsoft now has this collaboration suite. You're working on live data. Data is constantly changing, is constantly living. I need to share it with you. I need to give you that access to the document, or you need to give it to me. So you're going to send that via an email. You're going to attach it as a cloud attachment. And now I get that data. I now have access, or limited access, or whatever it is, for a time period. So now we get into the world of e-discovery with that data. And for this, I want to specifically focus on the two main sides of e-discovery, or let's go 3 sides. Number 1, how do I preserve that data, identify and preserve it? Number 2, how do I search it? And number 3, is how do I collect it and take it out of the Microsoft environment when I actually need to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's go through those in order. So the first one is I now have a case. We were sharing stuff. You're the custodian, right? Let's start with that easy scenario, right? You're the custodian. I need to identify and preserve data that you are the custodian for. What happens? And let's move away from historical. Let's talk about today in real time. When that happens, what actually is the process? What happens there in order to identify and preserve?
I'm going to go one step back on you here.
Sure.
So in my mind, have the distinction between retention versus preservation, and that will contribute towards our future plan here. But today in the Microsoft environment, you can set up what we call retention policies on SharePoint locations to be able to retain, and we could even say preserve here, the version as shared. So if Rachi were to send me a document within the same environment here, as a cloud attachment or hyperlinked attachment, the version as shared is preserved at the time of transmittal. So there is a copy that's linked to the message, my message, and his recipient or sender copy, whichever direction it's going.
Mm-hmm.
So we do have the ability from, I believe, January 2023 on. That's when the cloud attachment retention feature came into general availability, January 2023. So I could set broad retention across my environment that anytime that there was communication in Teams or in Exchange via Outlook, in email, that the version shared will be retained and preserved. And it's a copy of it that's preserved separate from the source location in SharePoint or OneDrive. So the end users don't have access to the copy.
Right.
We keep that.
So you send it to me, and let's keep it simple. In all of these scenarios, you're sending me the data.
Okay, so I'm the sender. Okay,
you're the sender, I'm the recipient.
Okay.
So you sent it to me.
Sent it to you, and it's stored off in some SharePoint site out here.
But I don't know that. I
don't
need to know that. All I know is that I now have access to this document that's living in in a SharePoint location that you stored it in, or your OneDrive, wherever you put it. It doesn't matter. And I now have access to that, and I can do whatever I've been granted the rights to do to that.
Yep.
Right?
Okay. And that can be one person, like one-on-one, or a team of 20
Exactly.
people.
Exactly.
It can be on a Teams channel.
And you sent that to me in February of 2023, and we've continued now to work on it for the last year and a half. And
now comes the time to do.
Right. And now today, November, I am now, you are now, let's keep it right now with the sender. You are the custodian, and we need to retain and preserve that data. Right. So when I do that, right, and the email that was sent in February of 23, that email is subject to the preservation, right? I now can know for sure that you're preserving that email, as well as the version of the attachment of the Word document that was sent in February 23, even though it's changed 1,000 times since then.
Yep.
What about the versions in between? He said subtly.
Yep. So what about the versions in between?
So by default, SharePoint has up to your organization's default setting is 500 versions, and that's something that organizations can change. By and large, they stick with the default. I don't have like the actual statistics around this, but again, I guess I'm not going to share the actual statistics around this.
No. That's
by and large, organizations do stick to that 500 versions. And when it comes to in-place preservation through e-discovery or through retention, if you do go beyond that 500 versions, we will still retain versions out like beyond that, extend beyond that 500 if there is a hold on that item.
So that version control of, hey, after, let's just say there's no hold, right? There's no preservation in place. So if that happened, then, and now we're up to version 1,000, right? The copy that existed, the original copy from February 23, that one is always
that
retained?
one is preserved. That one, no matter what. That one is preserved if you have the policy in place, and that's how it works today. I'm gonna put the caveat there, but today, you'll always preserve the version as shared, even if you've extended
version 2 through version 500 are now gone, and meaning
If there is no
preservation,
preservation on that
right,
site.
there's no preservation, and version 500 through 1000 are now the current 500 that are being kept. So
that are
now I
just
have
stored in SharePoint.
right.
Yep.
So now I have version 1, 500, all the way up till 1000, and
I'm sorry, but by preservation, do you mean preservation policy
hold,
or litigation hold?
let's talk specifically hold. Right, you were put
Gotcha.
on hold. You are not put on hold. So therefore, it's version 1, version 500, 501, 502, etc.
Oh, yeah.
until 1000.
Yep.
Right.
Now I'm going to throw a monkey wrench in here. What if Rachi was saving versions? You're the custodian, Stefanie, but what if Rachi was saving versions? Can we go and grab those?
What do you mean by saving versions?
Well, you made some changes and you were saving them to your SharePoint.
So I made changes and saved it as a different document.
Right.
Right. So first of all, you're the custodian there. So anything that I saved is out of the picture. Correct?
I mean, it's still in the environment, but
it's
yeah.
in the environment, but meaning I'm saving it in my OneDrive or my SharePoint separate. It's not just I hit save on that document.
Yeah.
And
If you
it's
create a
saving it-
separate, yeah.
If
If
I
you're
create
creating a separate
it's a
copy,
new document.
Yep.
It's considered a new document. Now,
because you're the sort of person who figures I want to see what the changes are and I want to work and then maybe Tom sends me something.
I want to have a copy of version 25 and version 100.
Yeah.
I can do that on my own. Stefanie can do that on her own as a separate document, but that's not the versioning copy that is iterating over time.
Yep.
So that's a separate copy. That's then
Yeah.
if Stefanie is the custodian and you have the preservation hold put on you, whatever I'm doing with that other copy makes no difference.
Yep.
What if we name all the people in the team in the litigation hold, including Rachi?
So
well,
right, we'll get there.
We could go down. We could go
Right.
we could go all into our platform capabilities and how custodians the custodian identification capabilities expand well beyond what the legal industry is generally using today. I mean, Microsoft, again, it sits on a platform. We have Graph. I think of Graph as like our interconnected fabric that we can see how users engage with one another. I can see
sort of like the Matrix.
The most relevant, even today within the solution, I can see the folks that what we call frequent collaborators. So if I'm the custodian, they'll see that I frequently collaborate with my boss and folks on my team and a few folks in other teams that may be relevant to the matter. But in terms of the industry definition of custodian today, as a custodian, I have a user mailbox and I have a personal SharePoint site, which is called a OneDrive site, where I typically store my individual data. I have access to other SharePoint sites within the environment that could be relevant to the matter, and that is exposed via the eDiscovery Premium solution on top of any teams that I may be a member of. So today I'm probably a member of like probably over 500 teams.
Yeah.
When our legal department, if they identify me as a custodian, they'll see my current membership, they'll see who I engage with. So that identification piece today is actually a bit quite robust, yeah. and there's definitely more coming in that regard as well. But
again,
if I were your opponent in the litigation, I would at some point, if I was tech savvy, be able to see those frequent collaborators, and I could put in a request to Rachi to produce his information.
Correct, and then all of the rules that existed against Stefanie's data, and again, assuming that I've got a retention policy in place that's going to be preserving it in the same way, all of those then would apply to my data.
Yep.
Yeah.
Now,
so it's doable.
Right. So now, if there is a preservation policy in place, and that scenario where there were 1,000 versions created over time, right? Version 1 is preserved, as well as all the 999 after that are all preserved. Correct?
So let me start over here with retention versus preservation.
Yep.
So
okay.
I'm sorry, your question was after the hold.
After the hold, yeah, that was
if
my
the organization had placed a cloud attachment retention policy on the locations in which the users are accessing at the time of share on either side, the version is preserved when it comes to performing any of your eDiscovery operations. So let's skip past identification now, because I went over that a little bit. But when it comes to collection, when they go to collect my mailbox, they will be able to pull in the version at the time of transmittal, along with the most recent version, and that's default. You could also, because all versions are preserved, pull in all versions. So you do have the ability today to pull in all 1,000, and we have, cool text compare capabilities.
If there was a policy to that effect.
If there was a policy, and again, that's how it works today.
And is the policy on by default?
The policy is not on by default. So organizations need to go ahead and apply these policies within their Microsoft 365 environment through the Purview suite. So
now you mentioned
today,
I'm sorry,
cloud attachment retention policies. Yep.
You mentioned in passing a moment or two ago eDiscovery Premium. Is everything we're discussing only available in, is that the same as E5, what we used to call E5? Is that eDiscovery Premium? Do you have to have that license to do what we're discussing here?
In order to perform the premium capabilities and take advantage of the premium features, the user must have, or the organization must have the E5 licensing.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So now you're the custodian. You have a preservation hold put on you, right? There was a cloud attachment retention policy put in place, right? So now I've got version 1. I've got every version since that hold was put into place.
Yep.
No matter how many thousands of versions might exist, right? And by default, I can then, correct me if I'm wrong, collect that first version, last version, or most current version, and optionally any
All
versions in
yep.
between,
Yep.
right? Which as a when requesting that, you do want to be careful because again, it potentially will have thousands of versions that have been created since, and every single change. Now,
and again, on that one, like by and large, most organizations do not collect all versions. They are interested in the most recent version and the version I shared, and that's like collectively across our customer base.
Do you think that, do you know, do they turn that option on, the policy option, or do most people leave it off?
The cloud attachment retention policy?
Yeah.
We do have significant adoption of it, but today there are some opportunities for us to improve it, and
I'm just curious if the customers, for the reason you just stated, there could be thousands of options or thousands of versions.
Them up ahead of time, like you have to preemptively set up these policies ahead of time today.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. You do have to have the foresight, and right now it is only forward looking. So from the time in which I implement the policy within my organization, from that point forward, we will preserve the version as shared on that cloud attachment, that hyperlinked attachment.
Yeah.
And that is great, but it also requires organizations to still have 2 processes in place, like from the time we implemented this retention policy and looking backwards.
So if this is a case that has data from 2020, right, January of 2020, or let's go even, it's got of November 2018, then that policy didn't exist. And what happens with that data? So that's
a great question. If the data still exists within the environment, so if the version is shared is still sitting in that SharePoint version history, an organization can go in and collect all of the versions, identify the version at the time it was shared, and that is the version shared.
Well,
that is quite the manual process,
right.
but
I was going to say let's talk about that for a second. So if I've got old data, right, the case involves something that happened 5 years ago.
Yep.
Right. And the data still does it. The document that was sent, it was sent in November 2019. And that document is still sitting in that location. It was pointed to in a SharePoint location. It's still sitting there in that SharePoint location, but it's been changed 8 times since then, since 2019, right? It was worked on for a couple months afterwards. So what happens? Can I capture that version that existed, and how would I do that? That existed when it was sent. November 1st, 2019, it was sent. Can I get to that specific version?
So in terms of the Microsoft solution for collection, it is possible to do that. I know that there are also third-party tools that enable you to do that. So
Yep.
yes, you can get if the version still exists within the environment,
And
and
that's the cap.
it's irrespective if there's a hold or not. If there is a hold, it's going to be there. If there's a retention policy, it's going to be there.
Right.
You preserve it in place. But in the case where there may not have been retention on that site, there may not have been a hold placed on that site
until today.
Yeah.
Until later.
If it exists, you can still collect it, and you can go in and identify which version was the version that was shared as part of the email communication.
And I want to, again, because let's be crystal clear, when you say you can go in and identify, so there's been 8 versions created since then. So how do I go in it? Because the tool, meaning the Microsoft Purview e-discovery tool, can't identify it because it's too old. It was before these policies. So how would I do that?
Oh yeah. How do you identify it? Yeah.
Based off of the versioning. And
so
let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So it would be a manual process today. And again, this is outside of using any of the premium tools that we have that do this automatically. The manual process would be coming down to just comparing the times. And I know that there are scalable tools on the market that have done this prior. And it's a bit of a science to go in to identify the specific version at the time it was shared, which I think is what the industry frustration is when it comes to just what's the scalability here, the proportionality argument that we've seen time and time again, being able to having to go in and manually identify, okay, Stefanie sent this email to Rachi with the attachment on just November 1st, 2019 at 4 a.m. Pacific. I see it on this email. Let me go back to all of these versions and see which one was created.
The immediate version right before that was the one that. But
you raise an interesting point, Stefanie, because proportionality, because that's a typical. In fact, my position right now is this is becoming the new boilerplate language in litigation. Is I can't do that. You want those versions, and I can't do it. It's too hard for me. It's time consuming and expensive. We literally had a case in our monthly case law review last month, which was last week. And I'm pretty sure it was Meta corporations raised all of those. It's too hard. We can't get it. It takes forever. It'll take, blah, 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 blah. And then in the next part of their brief, they said, and it's not relevant. And so the requesting attorneys asked them, well, what do you mean? How do you know it's not relevant? Well, we looked at them. Well, you just spent like a page and a half saying how difficult it is and we can't do it and it'll take too much time. But you looked at them all, right? Well, yeah, we did do it.
We also have to consider organizations that are subject to like the e-coms requirements, like SEC 754, and there are broad interpretations of what's required for this. And then there are also organizations that are planning ahead because they know that perhaps one day they will be required to produce the version at the time it was shared, even outside of the financial services industry.
But I think my point is, why it's so important that we're having this discussion with you is, at the meet and confer, you should be asking these questions, but you got to understand what the environment is. When the other side says, "Oh, we can't do that," well, did you try this? What are your policies? Were the policies in effect? When did the litigation hold go in effect? You want to be able to ask those questions to say, well, if just by happenstance they had the policy turned on, you can say, well, yeah, you can.
And that's today. So I think I will be very open with what I see as the 2 biggest gaps with our current implementation of the cloud attachment feature, and that is it is moving forward only. You can't go back and use the automagic feature on historical.
And I want to be crystal clear when you say moving forward. So it's
from the time the policy is applied.
The policy is applied within the environment forward, then any data since you said January 23, right? So that's when the policy was. That's when
the capabilities came out to general availability.
So if the data that is applicable to this litigation is post January 23 and the policy was applied, then it is guaranteed to be available, both the version shared at the time of the sharing and any version since then as are in existence.
So you say any version since then, we will only, as part of the cloud attachment policy, will only preserve the version at the time it was shared. Subsequent
Right.
versions would still need to be
and
applied
any
via retention policy
and
or
if
via
there was a
e-discovery
preservation hold, right?
Yeah, and whether you're using
Right.
the Microsoft hold or using third-party hold tools, that preservation is separate from retention here, and that's
Yep.
what I mean.
Yep.
Yeah.
So
And
the gap
you know,
is,
we talked about Teams. I'm sorry to interrupt. What if this exchange between you and Rocky was not in a Teams environment? It was just email. It was just exchange.
Same
so
thing.
whether it's
Doesn't matter.
yeah, whether it's Teams one-on-one chats or group chats where you have those like one-to-many,
Yeah.
or channel chats, like you create a team. We overuse the term.
It all still applies.
Team,
Yeah.
big T
Right.
teams, and then you
Yeah, the capital T.
channel.
Product, right. The product
Channels.
teams versus the right.
So you have like channels, channel conversations. Those are all communications, and those are all supported by this.
Okay,
We
cool.
also support, I think, like the Yammer individual messages as well. I think Yammer is now called Viva Engage for everybody.
It's called what?
Viva Engage.
Oh yeah, great.
We-
Like
I-
Las Vegas.
Yeah,
Do
there's
you have
name
like a,
changes.
keep rebranding.
do you have an Elvis
So-
theme song behind that someplace?
Yeah.
Viva Exchange.
Yeah.
So the two gaps are today, it is point in time forward from the time the retention policy is applied. Looking forward, we will preserve the version as shared. And then also today, the way in which you apply the policies is more location driven versus user or custodian centric.
Meaning I need to know that you had these 8 SharePoint sites available to you and you shared data from each of the or 6 of them.
Yeah.
And I'm applying the
Oh, that's
Yeah,
so
so
that's an
the
important
within
question.
application, what it ends up translating to is organizations do need to apply broad retention, like broad version of shared retention in their environment,
Right.
which is not ideal, but in true Microsoft fashion, we got the Microsoft, the MVP out the door, and are continuing to engage with customers to iterate on what the final or the next, I guess the next solution is going to be. Never final, right?
Never fine. Yeah.
So to solve for that, we will be solving for both of those gaps by the end of calendar year 25.
I'm laughing just because it reminds me
this is
of
important, Tom. This is important.
Yes, go ahead.
We will be solving for this. We want to enable organizations. We don't believe in over-preservation. We want to be able to support that with the technology, right? So we also need to be able to support not having the foresight to apply the retention policy years in advance. So if I'm an e-discovery administrator within my environment, I'm the practitioner that's responsible for managing the preservation of the content across Microsoft 365. In this case, Rachi is my custodian. I need to be able to apply a hold to him and have that hold from e-discovery alone preserve version as shared moving forward and also looking back. If the data the version that's shared still exists within his environment, Microsoft will crawl all of that historical data to identify if there were any versions of shared within any of Rachi's communications across Teams and Exchange and place a hold on the version as shared. If it is within the date range of the hold.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
So we have an infinite holds concept there.
Right. So I will, again, this isn't how it exists today, but once that is introduced, I won't have to know that Rachi had access to and was sharing data from 8 different SharePoint sites. I just know I'm going to apply a preservation hold policy onto Rachi, and then the system will go out and say, okay, I need to apply this preservation hold to this data that exists in these 6 different locations.
Correct. And we'll go ahead and preserve.
That's future state soon, like near future, like within a year or so.
Any anticipation on when that'll happen?
We are until we can share high fidelity dates. I'm going to stick with it'll be within the next year. We are actively engineering or actively coding this right now. As I speak to Tom, our lawyer.
I'm not going to tell people, hey, by Christmas you'll be able to do this wonderful feature.
So I think that what I want to just make sure we're coming to terms with here is that it is possible today, and I get a little bit, I'm a Microsoft champion, so I get a little bit uncomfortable when folks say that there is no commercially available solution, because in M365 today there is a commercially available solution that enables you to preserve the version as shared associated with a communication within your environment. You have to have premium licensing for this, but this capability does exist today. It just needs to be more refined for the e-discovery centric use case. But
Well,
again,
and
it is possible.
you know, that's
And it
exactly
is
the point
scalable
I wanted
today.
to make. We get these decisions that are based on pleadings from parties, which are based on statements from vendors, that it can't be done. There's no
Yeah.
commercially available solution. It's impossible, blah, 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 blah. And so that's, yeah, I just wanted to,
And we
Right.
yes,
to
and we do have
overcome those objections.
Right.
It's not like it's not the easy button, you know, it's going to
Well,
take some work
sometimes
to
it
do.
is.
I mean, for the organizations that have been, especially ones that migrated to the cloud as part of Teams, or sorry, COVID, they had to very quickly adopt
Oh,
Teams,
good
very
point.
quickly move into our Microsoft 365 environments. We saw a massive uptick in adoption of, again, Teams and SharePoint Online, and even, well, obviously a lot of these folks had already been in Exchange.
Yeah, I know. Good point. Good point.
But that contributes to a lot of organizations, very, very, very significantly high percentage of organizations do exist in the Microsoft 365 cloud now.
Yeah.
So they have had this capability available to them since January 2023.
23. Yep.
Thank you.
So
Now,
my point
one
was
other,
to make sure that people got the information to ask the right questions when they're faced with this boilerplate language of, oh, there's no commercially available
Right.
Yeah.
product to do this.
And that
It's
is just-
impossible.
right.
We go
That-
back to the e-discovery workflow on this too.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
when you do get to after you do the collection on the user today, we bring in, again, the version as shared, the most recent version. You do have the option to bring in all of the versions, but it is tied within the same email family. So you get that same experience that you have with traditional attachments. We have a
Right.
group identifier to group everything together, view that attachment in line. Whether you're using the Microsoft review solution or a third-party review solution, as part of the export, we will give you all of the metadata to group them together in your third-party tool. And again,
and when
customers
you
have been
say
doing this for a
and
while.
when you say group them together, so let's just say I'm not exporting out all the versions. I'm only doing the version as shared and the current version.
Mhm.
Both of those will be tied together with that group ID.
Yep.
Right. Now, I think that's
Cool.
also it is
Same thing with
important
Teams also.
with Teams, right? And you apply that same logic with the Teams communication.
Mhm.
It's also important to note that there have been some arguments made that none of this really matters because, well, when someone sends a cloud attachment, then as long as I can get whatever the current version is, then that's fine because nothing changes, right? That the data is kind of static. So when you sent me that message, then as long as I know that Word document exists in this SharePoint location, I just need to be able to get that SharePoint location, and I'm good with the current version there because it'll be the same as what you sent me. And that's
I'm gonna break that down into two separate components. So again, what's on the boat or the ship or the train, whatever you want to call it today. Even if you don't have any retention policy set up from January 2023 until now, the e-discovery premium solution will go in and by default grab the most recent version. And that is a setting that's available in every environment. When you go to do that collection, I want to bring in the most recent version of any modern, no, we're not calling them modern attachments, cloud attachments, hyperlinked attachments. So that you could do today, and you will be able to do moving forward. But to hone in on the statement that the data doesn't change, I mean, that is something that we can look at within our own, like our own legal department gave us a little bit of data here. They look across a few of our recent cases to be able to determine, was the version shared the same version as the most recent version? And I know there have been some assertions in the industry that it doesn't change necessarily. We can say that, again, across a small slice of our most recent cases, that in over 35% of them, the data did change. So users do interact with their data and constantly evolve their data. I think for me, I sit in engineering, so the way that we interact with our data may be different than how other groups within organizations do. I know we are constantly evolving.
Think about a sales organization, right?
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
I send you a document that has today's sales numbers, right?
Yeah.
And I'm working in that document, and I'm going to be constant, or a PowerPoint presentation. I'm constantly updating it with my current sales numbers. So the version that I sent you, which had sales of 15 million, right? Today, when I collected just the current version, it might say 27 million, right? So,
or it might say 10.
Or it might say 10, exactly. So in terms of especially projections, things like that. So it really, it's not just an engineering team thing in terms of the constant iteration.
No. I mean, you send a contract. I send a contract around.
This is another thing that legal departments need to consider, the ways in which their users interact with their data. And there are ways to restrict versioning. There are ways to restrict sharing within your environment. And that's different. That can be different from one organization to the next, because we want to make choice available to our customers. But as a rule, by and large, customers or like end users do interact with their live data. That's the coolest part about
That's the whole point of teams, isn't it? It's collaboration. I want to have 5 people working on this document, some at the same time, as you mentioned, Stefanie. And
I want to
hey, no, I don't like this clause. Let's change this clause. I can't go with that price. You know, we got to sell this at $10 a widget, not 12 or whatever.
Exactly. And the content is constantly evolving, so we need to be able to account for that. And I think to make the assertion that it doesn't change, not necessarily true. And we do have data to back that. Folks interact with their data.
But again, it's important to note that while that's true, that let's just say, yes, in most environments, the data will change at least a significant portion of it. So you can't just collect the most recent version. But for someone to assert that I only need to collect the most recent version because either it doesn't change or because that's all I'm able to do, both of those statements we can pretty definitively say are not true. Because yes, it does change, and yes, I am able to get the version as shared.
Correct.
Cool. So we've been at it for a while, and before I ask you if you have any last thoughts, I've got a sidebar question that you may or may not be able to answer, Stefanie. So this is all great in big organizations that have premium licenses, and we're using LLMs, right? So Microsoft, as well as several other people, has in the last year talked about small language models. So that if you're not,
Tom, what's the connection with the LLM? Let's
large language models. These are large language models.
Right, but how is that applying here?
Because small firms, which are 70% of the attorneys in the country, don't usually have or may not have documents that meet the LLM level. Some people insist that you need to have at least 1 million documents for an LLM to work effectively. So the question is, and if you don't, you're not going to have an E5 license. You're not going to have a premium license. So my question is, if you know, Stefanie, is Microsoft recognizing that and saying there should be some smaller level because they released, and I don't even know how to pronounce this. They released their own small language model called, is it Chai? CHI? Chai? Chi? Chi 4? Chi 3?
You know what we're referring to?
Sure. Okay.
Yeah. It's so there's Mistral 7B, Microsoft Phi, PHI 2. Does that ring a bell at all? Have you heard about that? I mean, I think the idea here is to go to people who don't have premium licenses.
Because our licensing is enterprise centric, it's entitlement based. It's based off of the organization in which these law firms would represent the users within that organization. The law firm I still see as a separate organization, right? Whether the organization is 2 seats or 1 million seats, and we have both ends of the spectrum that are capable of using the eDiscovery Premium solution or any of the premium capabilities. We're agnostic of size of the organization. So with regard to LLMs, that would be more of a GPT question and what you can do with Copilot.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So We do have, this kind of, to me, it kind of falls outside of e-discovery. There's obviously opportunity for more integration with generative AI within our solutions. Will your responses be, and this is again for generative AI specifically, will the responses be valid based off of the data in which the model has access to? The richness is dependent upon the corpus that the model has access to and what the model is built on. So I don't know if it necessarily comes down to the size of the organization.
Well, that's a good point, because I think we all know there's big firms and big companies
Yeah.
who also do small cases.
Yeah.
But I guess the issue here is there something that you can point at smaller data sets that may not be ripe for using Gen AI or Chat GPT with, and I think that's just sort of a
That's definitely food for thought there.
it's a recent development. Yeah. I mean, the press release I saw about this was only June of this year. So, that's
Which
incredible.
in some ways is light years
Well,
gone.
in some
Things
years,
are changing so rapidly.
yeah. And I think to that point, the whole idea was Microsoft's small language model only works with 3.8 billion parameters, as opposed to GBT uses 200 billion parameters.
Yeah.
It's just a smaller tool.
Yeah.
But if you have a smaller data set, that may be something that's really
Yeah.
helpful.
And it depends on what the data set, like what for the LLMs, what you're using them for. I think for
Yeah.
eDiscovery Premium, we're not using any.
Oh no.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're not.
Yeah, no, it was like I said, this was a complete
sidebar. Yep.
this was a complete sidebar.
We need like
Yeah.
a follow-up co-pilot or
Yeah,
generative
exactly.
AI
Gen
session.
AI in Microsoft eDiscovery.
It's going to be a co-pilot small language model.
Yes.
So,
Okay.
so
let's
closing
summarize.
thoughts.
We've been talking for an hour, so let's summarize kind of the overall. What message do you want people to understand in terms of what the capabilities are, so that way, and one other point is, and where can they go to find more? Where do they learn
Yeah,
more?
that's a real big point.
Yeah.
Resources is something that I get asked about all the time.
Yeah.
So I'll start with the last question there. Our Microsoft Learn documentation, the Purview specific documentation is broken out by solution. So I don't have the short link on hand right now. We can put it in the little blurb when you post the YouTube video. But we have extremely well written, very verbose documentation on how our products work, how to set them up. We also have, if you want to understand what's coming on the roadmap, so we have what's available today. In our documentation, we'll highlight anything that's in public preview or generally available. If you want to know what's coming, we have something called the Microsoft 365 roadmap. You can do a quick Bing search or Google search for Microsoft 365 roadmap. You can filter down by product. You can even search the term eDiscovery in there. I have a short link for that one. It's aka.ms/eDiscovery roadmap. You could even do aka.ms/eDisco roadmap, and it'll bring up the eDiscovery specific roadmap.
I don't want to say eDisco.
It's all beyond eDiscovery, so you can just search for like Purview or compliance.
Yeah. No, I use the roadmap a lot. Greg Buckles, I don't know if you know Greg. Greg preserves all the roadmaps. He's got a little archive of the last year's roadmaps. It's great.
That's music to my ears. I love that folks are looking at the roadmap. Another place. Another place in which organizations get their updates is through Message Center. So if you're a Message Center admin or like an administrator within your organization, you have access to more specific postings that the product team will submit across all of our products. So you can get more concrete understanding of the features that are coming up, along with other stuff that's in Message Center. So I've heard from a lot of customers recently that they actually do really review the Message Center posts, which and for me, I want to make sure that there's enough information in both locations. But that's how you get your updates, and that's how you get your understanding of the how the solutions work. I know there are so many different opinions on how to set up the solutions, how the solutions work. And there are folks that may not necessarily keep up to date. I'm always open for conversation. I would even myself, I go back to our documentation constantly to remind myself how things work. I need
If
to
you
know
could,
how you all
uh,
thing works, I'll go back over to our documentation.
great. If you could send me that support link, I will, in
I
fact,
definitely will.
Yep.
put it
well,
in with the post. Yeah.
Yep.
And,
And then the summary of where we sit. So
well, sorry, one other resource is also the vendors consultants, that there are some
Oh, yeah.
really good ones.
many,
Yep.
many good ones that I will not name. But we have you can look at the MISA profiles of partners and filter down to our Purview partners, and those are ones that engage with us on a frequent basis.
Good.
And partners are also very open to collaborate with Microsoft engineering, and they do. That's where we get our champion partners for supporting our customers. We
Yeah, I
can't
had a
do it alone in
great
Microsoft
conversation with the
engineering.
guy at Lighthouse
Definitely need it.
a couple of weeks ago who was really on top of this.
Yep.
So yeah, there are some great partners out there. Absolutely.
There's definitely some great partners out there.
Okay.
There's ones that have opportunities for improvement that we are happy to continue to engage with. But I definitely think there are some rock star partners out there, and I sit in engineering, and so that's where I'm gonna stop that one.
Yep.
Not allowed to go beyond that, but
Okay.
No, that's I
where
totally
do we,
understood.
where do we so in my mind, we have an obligation to enable our customers, these organizations, to meet their regulatory, legal, and big business obligations. So what does that mean? I think in terms of your retention of communication requirements, and also your just overall preservation requirements. So we want to be able to enable organizations to meet both. Today, we are enabling organizations to meet their retention requirements, not as robust as it needs to be from a implementation standpoint, but it is all technically available and scalable. In the future, we will be able to enable organizations, again, by the end of 2025 is our commitment here, to enable organizations to meet all of their preservation requirements on a user level with the automagic or easy capabilities. Right. But again, today,
it's
for organizations that are interested in setting up these retention policies to preserve the version as shared at the time of transmittal of the communication, you can do that. I can share again, Tom, some deployment acceleration guidance that Microsoft has put out there for folks to consume and support, possibly doing like a proof of concept. And then my team specifically within Microsoft also supports organizations in unblocking their adoption.
Okay, great. Well, Stefanie, totally appreciate your time. Rachi, great to see you and talk with you again, and appreciate your taking the time out of your frantic football schedule to. How long are you in the country for?
Another week.
Okay.
I got my football out of the way. Now it's the music time. So concerts for the next week, and a little work on the side. So yeah, all good.
And I'm sure you were as dismayed as I was on that note to hear that Phil Lesh had passed a couple weeks ago. I got to meet him a few times. He was a real character. Nice guy, really nice guy. Yeah, that was unfortunate.
The world is a worse place without him. So
yeah. So
anyway,
all right. Well, Stefanie, thanks again. Really appreciate it. This has been extremely helpful.
Thank you so much, Tom and Rachi, for having me here.
Yeah.
And we'll just forward all the emails we get about this to you.
Sounds good.
Thanks, Tom.
That's not a threat. Take care.